James, if I were to give you an axe and ask you to chop down a small tree and you'd never chopped down a tree before you begin, I would say, how long do you think this is going to take? And let's say you'd never used an axe before, and you'd say, I have no idea. And I'm like, you have to make a guess. So you would make a guess. And then you start chopping. And I would let you chop for a minute, and then I'd ask you to stop, and I'd say, okay, revise your guess. And so you would revise it. And if I did this like every minute, and then eventually every 5 minutes and wrote down what your guesses were, we would find that at a certain point, your guesses would get closer and closer to what the actual number is.
You have found Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Downloadable audio episodes can be found in the podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. We are locally underwritten by the Bank of Sun Prairie, Calls on Call Extraordinary Answering Service, as well as the Bold Business Book. And today we're welcoming / preparing to learn from Jeff Greenfield of Provalytics. How is it going today?
Oh, it's going great, James. It's I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, let's just start out right off the bat. What is Provalytics?
Provalytics is a marketing measurement platform. And it essentially, there's an old saying in marketing from a famous marketer from the Midwest by the name of John Wanamaker. And he's attributed to saying, half the money I spend in advertising is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And that has plagued marketers since the beginning of marketing. If you do a bunch of things, it's tough to figure out, especially at the same time, it's tough to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And our software solves that for very large advertisers. And
Nice.
so yeah, it's pretty cool. It's numbers, it's statistics, you know, it doesn't sound sexy or exciting, but it really is because you get to be on the inside of what some of the largest advertisers in the world are doing. And so you get great insight as a marketer, which is really cool.
Yeah, I like it. I can tell you from a guy that spent what I consider to be at times too much on marketing
Hmm.
on the digital side. I feel like we were either sold a lie or I believed something that didn't come true. When, just as an example, with Google Analytics or something like that, where like Google Ads should be able to tell you everything you need to know about where to spend and all that jazz. And I feel like they keep enough hidden where they're just like, just throw some money at that and see what happens. So I'm interested to hear about the software because that may be the magic bullet that a lot of
Well,
people spending money on marketing have been looking for.
it's interesting that you bring up Google Analytics and Google because and you're right that what you said is what most people believe. Google Analytics should be able to tell you the answer to things. But what people forget is that it's called Google Analytics. It's now GA4, Google Analytics 4. So we should really call it Google's Analytics. It does a really good job of measuring how well Google's products are doing for you, but a lousy job at measuring how everyone else is doing. So let me give you an example. Most marketers today, if they're spending any bit of money, they typically start in like either Facebook or they start in Google. But let's say you're a marketer and you're in both places. Let's say you own a flower shop, okay? And you've got the pay-per-click going in Google. So when someone types in your name or they type in flowers near me and your location, it shows up. So your ad shows up there. And then you're running a bunch of video ads and some really cool ads on Facebook. So here's a real life scenario. Someone is scrolling through content on Facebook and they see your ad and they kind of scroll past it, but maybe it catches attention, but they don't do anything with it. And then, the next day they're on Instagram and they see a little bit more and they're like, oh, that looks really good. And let's say Valentine's Day is coming up. Oh, I'm thinking maybe I should do something with this, but then they get distracted, just like everyone does. And then a couple hours later, they're like, oh my God, I got to get those flowers. And what do? They Google and they see the ad and they click on it. So the consumer ends up buying stuff. And we would say, now that we know all those steps, that it's actually Facebook and Instagram that really got the customer. All Google did was just kind of be the last action. It was a navigation. And the flower shop's Google Analytics, it gives 100% of the credit for that sale to the Google pay-per-click. Doesn't give anything to Facebook or Instagram at all. And so what ends up happening is that it ends up telling people where they look at the end of the month and like, my God, I spent so much money on Facebook and didn't really do anything. Google's where I should put my money at. But the problem is that those ads, those particular ads that we're talking about in Google, people are only searching for you once they already know who you are. And in this example, they didn't know who you were. And this is a small example of like a local flower shop. So now take that same problem and expand it across all of the very large advertisers and then pan the camera back like 20 years. And what we've seen happen in most marketing campaigns is 20, 25 years ago, most of marketing was what we would call branding. It was all about, I'm going to put a message out there to everyone in my area or everyone in the US that's feel good, that maybe has some comedy with it. Maybe it's a little emotional to put a little hook in you so you'll think about my brand when you're ready to buy. And what's happened over the last 20 years is that marketers have started to put more and more dollars on that kind of that last action to be right there. And they've moved dollars off of that branding. And as a result, advertising costs have gone up for these marketers. The ads don't work as well as they used to. And now they're in this hyper competitive situation, and part of that reason is because Google Analytics, which everyone uses, even the largest marketers use them, it only measures clicks. It doesn't measure the fact that someone saw an ad and then did an action later on. So another good example is one of the most popular things that people are doing is connected television, CTV ads. Now to the consumer, to us, we're watching a game and we see an ad for like a local place and we're like, wow, that's an expensive ad. And it is, but the reality is there's probably a chance that that ad was only seen by me and like five or six other people. It didn't go out to everyone in the area or anyone in the country, but it felt the same to me. But in Google Analytics, there's no tab for CTV, and there's nothing for me to click on that TV ad. That TV just builds awareness. And that's part of the problem, is that most of the ways that people are measuring their outcomes is based on that last action, that last click. It would be like if you gave credit, if you sell Snickers bars and you gave credit to the supermarket checkout person because they were the ones who scanned it, because they were the last one who touched it, because it was right there in the candy aisle and you grabbed it as you were in line. It just doesn't make sense with the way that marketing works. But even the largest advertisers in the US get confused as well. And that's part of the problem, is trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, and what half is actually being wasted. And what's funny is that statement from John Wanamaker, half of the money in advertising is wasted. I don't know which half. It's actually more like, for most marketers, like 90%.
I was gonna say, yeah, 90
It,
10. Yeah.
yeah, it's actually a lot more than that. And marketers freak out when they actually look at the numbers and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. It's because it's really bad because things are so confusing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that it's getting worse. I guess I was chatting with a buddy about this the other day, another entrepreneur, that the channels that we have for marketing now are almost limitless compared to if you look at 30 years ago, where you had whatever, three, four channels on TV, you had newspaper and yellow pages. And yellow pages, if you didn't do it that year, I guess you're not in there. And newspapers, crazy money. I mean, outside of maybe magazines, the back of magazines or something like that, or late night, what do they call those things where it's an hour long advertisement?
An infomercial.
Infomercial, yeah. So things like that, like you didn't have all these different social media things, you didn't have web search, you didn't have all these things, all these different channels. And it's funny because we were joking that, you couldn't measure how well your newspaper ad went. But then you thought, well, you only had a newspaper ad. That was the only ad that you had. So if
Right.
the phone rang, I guess it worked. If it didn't ring, I guess it didn't work.
Well,
So
back before digital, the way that larger marketers did it, because remember, all they had was, newspaper. So we would call that print, magazine, television, radio, and direct mail. They would use math and statistics to figure it out. They didn't just guess. So, you think about a big brand like BMW, okay, or like an AT&T back in the day. They would constantly, every day, be in every newspaper, magazines, print, radio, constantly. And yet they were able, using math, to figure out what was working and what wasn't working. But what's happened now is, and as you said earlier, 30 years ago, we only had so many places, and you don't even have to go back that far. So think about like a typical, like let's say like a health and beauty product. Okay. You go back 5 years ago and, you've got a website where you sell directly to consumers and you're in retail. Okay. So let's say you're in all the pharmacies and things like that. So all of a sudden, Amazon has started to grow and it's started to really grow up. So, and now you're starting to notice that you're not on Amazon, but people search for your product on there because people are getting used to buying there and they're finding competitive products. And you're noticing over a year or so, your sales are starting to dwindle down in retail. So now you have to put an Amazon store. So now you're in Amazon, you have a store there. So when people search, they find you. But then Amazon starts to roll out very rapidly their advertising. And so when people search your name, if you don't advertise, a competitor will show up instead of you. So now you have to advertise there. Okay, great. Well, Walmart decides to roll out. You're in a Walmart, you're already in every single Walmart, but they decide to roll out their Walmart online. And you go there and you search and you see competitors are there. So now you have to be available Walmart online. And then they roll out advertising. And then the same happens with Target and CVS and all of these places. And you have like inside, you have a team of like marketers and ad agencies that are used to handling the website and the regular retail, but now you have to hire all sorts of new people. And now they have to become, you have to hire experts in Amazon and all these online marketplaces. And now your budget is more difficult to figure out. You have to go to the CFO, finance, and ask for more money. But more importantly than that, now it's really confusing to figure out because your Amazon people are saying, hey, we spent X amount of dollars and we got X amount in return. Okay, great. That's real simple because it's this closed environment. But then you start thinking to yourself, well, wait a second, how did people know to go to Amazon? Like maybe I'm running ads on radio or TV like an old school marketer. And I'm saying go to my website, but I see ads sometimes. And they say go to my website, but I'm used to buying on Amazon. So I go to Amazon. And then there's sometimes people go to Amazon and they search for something and they go to the page and then they say, huh, I wonder if they have a website. So what's happening now is that ads that are specific, meaning you're in Amazon, those ads that are designed to drive sales in Amazon that are actually lifting sales outside of Amazon. And the ads that you're buying that are to drive sales to your website are actually driving people to Amazon because consumers are what we would call omnichannel. They're going to buy wherever they want to buy. And we've also trained consumers, especially in e-commerce, that everything is on sale any time of the year. You just have to search for the coupon code or go to a different store and you're going to find a better deal. That's just what we've trained people to do. And so as a result, if somebody wants your product and they're on CVS and they're like, I wonder if I get a better deal at Amazon. They'll go to Amazon, they'll go to your website because they want the product now. They're going to find the best deal for it. So it has now become so complicated to figure out where that missing half or that missing that wasted 90% is at. But the old school techniques were able to do that because they used math and statistics. But what happened with that old school technique is that it was a heavy lift, meaning these analysts would come in and they'd say, okay, we need 3 years worth of data. So, you know, nobody has like 3 years worth of data all perfectly organized sitting in their Google Drive. So that became like a whole project to get all that data together. And then they'd be asking for more and more data. And then it would be like usually a 6 month project. And the result of this project would be like a several hundred page PowerPoint presentation that would tell you if you want to grow your brand X%, this is where you need to move your dollars. And it would say, move, 3% from TV over to print or something like that. But to say to a digital marketer today, well, based upon this statistical model and math, we're going to give you digital folks 3% more dollars. Take it away. And digital people are like, 3%? Okay, that's great. But in Google, if I increase it 3%, like what keywords? If it's Facebook, what campaigns, what ad groups, what creatives, which of my display campaigns and CTV, which creative, which this? In the digital realm, we're all very tactical and very granular, and that's the type of output that we need. And so those modeling techniques and math also, because they took so long, I would get information back and it would be like a year old. It's like, okay,
Oh,
well, that doesn't do me any good. My boss wants me to tell him how last month did. I can't wait for another year for that.
right. Interesting. So, what is the solution?
Well, the solution was back in like as digital started to grow in like 2008 was to leverage the big data movement, which was collect every bit of data that you could get and try to make sense of it. And so, what I did back in those days, I created one of the first companies that measured the effectiveness of marketing, but did it at a user level where we would track every user anonymously. We wouldn't know who you were, but every time you clicked on an ad to come to the site, we would track that just like Google Analytics. But what we would do different than Google Analytics is that every ad that was out there, every Facebook ad, every place that you saw an ad at would have a little piece of code in there that would let us know that user 1234 actually saw an ad. So that by the time you came along and actually purchased something, we would look into the database and line up this long line of every ad that you saw, every action you took, all the way through to purchase. And on its own, there wasn't much to learn by looking at a single person. But when you aggregate up all the purchases that were made in a single day, and then roll them up into a week, into a month, and you have thousands upon thousands of actions. Now you can start to say, aha, this ad seems to be starting people down a path, even though they didn't click. And people that start with this ad, they tend to purchase faster than these other ads. And this one seems to be performing better. So using machine learning, we were able to determine what was working and what was not working. And that worked great until like one day Facebook said, "Hey, we're not going to let anybody have this data anymore.
Ah,
And
there it is.
nobody's going to have this data." And then YouTube came along and said, "Yeah, us neither. We're not going to allow anybody to have this data." And then the whole kind of privacy movement came along right around with COVID, and that kind of stopped all of that. So you can still get the click data. But as we talked about, the click data doesn't tell you what they saw that led to that click, and that's the most valuable thing. So now, and this is a situation that I was in around 2022 when I saw that all of these privacy changes were coming, and I said, I think there's an opportunity where we can use a little more involved machine learning, some of the early AI, and the faster computers. And we're going to go back to the future. We're going to take the science from the past, that statistical modeling technique and math that they used before digital, and we're going to upgrade it for today's standards. We're going to upgrade it in a couple ways. One way is we're going to get it so we can turn it around a lot faster than once every 6 to 9 months. At least update it, to be able to potentially update it daily. But most of our clients do it monthly or twice per month. And then the other thing is we're going to be able to not only tell a marketer you have 3% more in digital, we're going to be able to go to a very, very granular level. And like we could when we had all of that data. And for that, we leverage AI to say, okay, this is what we have, fill in the gaps. And of course, the question is, well, how do you know that it did it
Right?
right?
Fair question. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way you do that is you go back and you validate. And what you do is that you take a model and you train it with some data, and then you say, I'm going to give you the marketing data, but I'm going to hold back all of the sales. I know what the sales are, but I'm not going to tell you, and I want to see how well you predict. And so when you have a model that can predict better than 85 to 90%, which is what our models do, you're like, okay, this is something that I can bet with. Now, there's an old saying in this business that, all models are wrong. Some are useful because it's not deterministic. It's not 100%. It's a probabilistic model, but it predicts really well. But I still like to tell marketers that this approach it's not right. It's less wrong than what they're doing today. It's less wrong. And that's the solution today is that we actually take techniques from the past and bring them forward. Interestingly enough, the one of the basis of our techniques, which is what's driving a lot of the AI today, is a technique called Bayesian. And this formula was actually developed in the 1700s.
Whoa.
And then we use another technique from the early 60s. So we use two things that we could have done 10, 15, 20 years ago, but the computers weren't fast enough. And now they are. So it's absolutely amazing.
I know that I've heard of Bayesian, but I can't for the life of me place it. I
It
guess,
was used in
yeah.
the in World War II to decrypt some of the codes, some of the submarine codes. It's been used for years for all sorts of interesting mathematical problems. The reason it's used is because it works very similar to how human beings think. So let me give you an example. James, if I were to give you an axe and ask you to chop down a small tree and you'd never chopped down a tree before you begin, I would say, how long do you think this is going to take? And let's say you'd never used an axe before, and you'd say, I have no idea. And I'm like, you have to make a guess. So you would make a guess. And then you start chopping. And I would let you chop for a minute, and then I'd ask you to stop, and I'd say, okay, revise your guess. And so you would revise it. And if I did this like every minute, and then eventually every 5 minutes and wrote down what your guesses were, we would find that at a certain point, your guesses would get closer and closer to what the actual number is. And that's how Bayesian works. It says, hey, this is all the information I have, so I'm going to make my best guess. And the reason that folks use it is because here was the last guess. Here's new information. I don't have to go all the way back through every single bit of data, historical data. I can update very rapidly. So when you think about something like a self-driving car that's constantly learning, it has to update its memory banks constantly as it's learning. Bayesian is involved in that because of how frequently it can update.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
1700s though, isn't that wild?
That is wild. I
Yeah.
feel like I came across something. I can tell you what I was looking for where I ended up on this because I wasn't smart enough to look up Bayesian or something like that. So we call answering service and we're trying to figure out for number of calls, how do we figure out the number of agents for those calls? And I stumbled upon when telephones were first invented and AT&T was putting them in people's houses and they had to know how many lines because they couldn't have a line to everyone's house
Right.
individually. So they had to figure out essentially how many phone calls do people make simultaneously. And it was one of those like, where's the math head explosion for me to figure this out? And
There's
so
a
you stumble upon all these things that people way smarter than me have figured out, and then you figure out like hundreds of years ago you figured this stuff out.
well, there's
Like
an
it,
interesting and you just reminded me as you were thinking about that one of the interesting kind of math problems is what they call the Monty Hall problem. And
okay.
yeah, there was a TV show on in the 70s called Let's Make a Deal.
Yeah.
And you get up there and there's three doors, and they tell you behind one of the doors is, there's three prizes. There's $1 million. There's a kitchenette set, and there's $1 million. There's nothing, and then there's a goat. And so you choose door number three. And he opens the door, and you don't want door number three. Actually, no, you choose door number one. You choose door number one. And he's like, okay, I'm going to show you what's behind door number three. He opens up door number three, and there's nothing behind there. And so then he asks, do you want to change your mind? Because now you have between door number one and door number two. And there's a great explanation. All you have to do is Google the Monty Hall problem, and it'll explain all the math, which I'm not great at. But statistically, you are better off sticking with your first answer. Most people will switch and they'll say, no, I want to move over to door number two. Uh, and that statistically ruins your odds. Your best odds are to stick with your first answer. But it's a famous math problem called the Monty Hall. I think it was because somebody wrote a letter to the editor and it was explained years ago. But there's, I think, even a Wikipedia article about it. But
I
that does
came
a really good
across
job.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah, because essentially you're looking at it as a 50-50 shot, when in
right.
reality it's a 66-33 shot.
Yeah,
You have 66% likelihood that what you want is behind door number one,
that's
if I
right.
remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. And I still have a hard time wrapping my head around that.
I know. Me too. So I just remember stick with your first answer. It's
Yeah,
always
there you go.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah. There's a gut feeling that drew you to that. Stay with it. Definitely.
So tell me a little bit about when Facebook pulls the information or prohibits access to the information. YouTube does the same thing, and they do it. I don't. Did they kind of hide behind the privacy thing, or was the goal that they figured people are going to have to spend more money to try to figure out what works? So it's a win-win for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is that both Facebook and YouTube at the time, their users were predominantly going more mobile. Uh,
Okay.
and that's when this was going on. And what they found is that, they optimize the site so it loads quickly. But when you have all of these marketing research tags that are there, it slows things down, and it inhibits the user experience.
Okay.
So that was the reason. That was one reason. That was both Facebook and YouTube. YouTube, because at the time they were bigger, they were owned by Google. Remember, Facebook in the early days was still small. They are this like global big property, and privacy really took off in the European Union first with this thing called GDPR. And essentially, what it said was to any company, including data companies, they said, listen, you may have a list of people where you've got their profiles and all these things. Guess what? That list is gone. You can't access it anymore. You now have to ask people if they want to opt in. So that's the option. People now have to opt in. And when that occurred, a lot of companies left the European Union, a lot of the ad tech companies. Google saw this coming along, and so they made a decision across the board, across all of their properties, to no longer allow people to target and get user level data across any of their ads products. So they were kind of first at this. But you did bring up a great question about, are they kind of hiding behind things? And I think one of the things that's important to understand is that most of the users on Facebook, most of the advertisers, I'd say probably 80, excuse me.
No, you're good. You're good. I have the same thing going on. It's 'tis the season, right? As the seasons change, your body's like, whoa, what's going
Oh
on
my
here?
God, and this time of day. With the sun. All right. Hopefully we'll be able to edit that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can get that out. No worries. No worries.
Thank you. With Facebook, it's important to understand that, oh, let's try that again.
No, it's all
Anyway,
good.
let's give it
It's
a
all
minute.
good.
Yeah. Uh, With Facebook, it's important to understand that 80 to 85% of all of their advertisers are small business owners
Mhm.
spending just a couple $100 a month. So even if they allowed that level of measurement, they're not going to invest thousands of dollars a month to measure if they're only spending a couple $100. And if you're just advertising on Facebook and Meta and you're not elsewhere, Meta does a very good job of telling you what's working and what's not working. They're incentivized. They want you to spend more dollars with them. It's only for larger advertisers where they start to send similar messages on different platforms that things get very, very difficult. So it was done to speed things up. It was also done under the guise of privacy, if you will, and just this whole global movement moving towards this concept that people don't necessarily want to be tracked. They want a good user experience, but I don't want you to know everything about me. And then I don't want you selling that information to other people. That's the biggest concern.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting the digital marketing landscape, I guess, as far as what information is given. And this is coming from a guy I had advertised on Facebook. We're talking years ago. And it was interesting because I learned this was, I'm certain that it's changed now. I have no idea. But I gave him some money. And I think back then you had to say what a lead was worth to you, kind of thing. Something like that. I think I remember a sliding scale. This is, I mean, we're talking probably approaching 10 years ago. And you say, hey, a lead is worth whatever, $5 or something like that. And then stuff happens and you're like, oh, this is good. Now a lead is worth more to me. And it seemed like the budget that I had, as long as Facebook said, like, hey, your budget was $300, now it's $500, we ended up getting the same return, same purchases, not necessarily a exponential return. Like we didn't get twice as much by spending 600 versus 300. We got the same thing we got at 600 as we got at 300. And it was one of those like, I feel like whatever number we put there, they're just going to give us these leads and be like, that's what it was. So
Well,
I pulled out of that game.
well, there's a couple of things that are going on there. One is the fact that there's a concept called saturation or marginal return. So let's say you're going and you're spending along and your cost per sale or your cost per lead is $10. And as it turns out, you make $1,000 off of each lead on average. So you're like, whoa, I could afford to spend $500. Let me double my budget. So you double your budget, expecting it to be still $10 per lead, and now it's around 12. And so what happens is that there's a curve. As you start to spend more, eventually it curves around where your cost to acquire a customer uh, tends to go up. And that's that point of marginal return. So there's only so much room that these things can grow. The other scenario that you have going on in Facebook and any other type of modern digital media is that it's a bid environment. So it
Mhm.
used to be years ago, you call up a magazine or a newspaper, the cost is the cost. That's it. The cost for the TV ad is the cost for the TV ad. Super Bowl is a great example. This year it was $8 million. Doesn't matter how many people are watching, it's $8 million. That's it. Well, what actually happens in the digital world is it's an auction. So like if you were to go to the New York Times and you go to the newyorktimes.com, as that page is loading in near real time, there's like an auctioneer in the background says, we have a male age between 34 and 44 who drives a BMW, who lives here, who likes cigars and boating. How much am I bid on this person? And in real time, there's a bid that happens, and you won the bid, and that's the ad that's shown. I mean,
Well, that's in real time.
in real time across every single digital platform you're on, same thing is happening on Facebook. So let's say you come out with some innovative, really cool new service, and all of a sudden you're out there and you're selling and things are going great. Well, the world that we live in today is the size hasn't changed, but the degree to which that information gets shared across the world is it's incredible. Uh, I mean, it's really amazing that you can talk to someone on the other side of the world on a Zoom call,
It
and
is. It's
it, it's
incredible.
it's really amazing. And so what happens is that there's folks out there that are looking for business opportunities and looking for businesses, and there's companies out there that will sell information on these new emerging businesses that are coming up. And so I can guarantee you that if you come up with some really cool thing and all of a sudden you're killing it, it's and you're 6 months into it, you better be prepared. You're on borrowed time because someone is going to find out about it. And then all of a sudden, when that auction happens in the beginning, you're pretty much the only person there. Uh, but now there's going to be competitors there and they may be bidding on the same things you are. And so what does that mean? That means the price that you paid yesterday is now going to go up to whatever their bid limit is. And so, and then other people come on as well too. We see this happen a lot with products that sell, and someone starts a Shopify store, and then they go to Amazon, and then, or maybe they're not even on Amazon, and then all of a sudden they go and search on Amazon, and there's their exact product from someone overseas selling,
Mm.
and they're selling it at less than half the cost that they're selling it at. So how do you compete against that? But in the ad world, it's this real-time auction that happens. So as competitors start to come on, your cost to advertise goes up. You could double, triple your cost and get the same or less amount. We see this across all of our larger advertisers and all this bid type media. If you spend the same amount of money each year over year, you're getting less attention, less number of people coming to your website. And now TV, that used to be like a flat rate based upon the program and the estimated number of viewers, the reason why streaming and connected TV, why advertisers or marketers or the publishers themselves love it so much is because now it's an auction basis. So that same digitization of advertising with an auction has now moved over to when you're sitting streaming the game. Those
Huh.
ads, people are bidding for your attention, and the highest bid wins.
And that's in real time. So I'm just thinking, for example, I have whatever, Amazon Prime, and I'm gonna go watch a TV show or a movie or something like that on Amazon Prime. And initially they show this little, I don't know, it's a bunch of pictures of samples of whatever. I imagine that's what it's using for processing time to figure out, like, here we got James, here's his purchase history, here's what he's likely to buy. Let's throw this ad at him, kind of thing.
Well, the advantage there is they already know who you are, James, because you're logged into Amazon Prime.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Oh my gosh, they're following me.
But if you and I were to sit there with two TVs right next to each other
Hmm.
in different households, because not only do they know us by our logged in information, but then there's another data set that they know based upon the IP address of your house. They know all your household information as well too, because maybe there's other Amazon buyers and purchasers there. But we could sit right next to each other, start to stream the same thing and see completely different ads.
Interesting.
Now, in the early days of Netflix, when they opened up their ads platform, it was all the same ads because it was just larger advertisers and they were really testing the platform. But now we're at the point where everything is an auction type basis. Now, there's also a quality assessment as well too, and Google does that as well, is that, remember at the end of the day, if I'm Amazon Prime and an ad shows up that ruins your experience, you're going to watch less, there's less revenue for me, and you're going to be upset, and that's not good. So they value that experience more than anything else, but
All
it's
right.
still primarily an auction.
Interesting. That is bizarre. It's always interesting to have a conversation with a marketing person, especially digital marketing, because I have this it's the person versus the business kind of thing. Where on the personal side, I want my privacy. I just want to use my phone and go online and read my email without somebody snooping or knowing that it's being watched. But on the marketing side, I want to know, I want my marketing dollars to be as efficient as possible. And I want to be able to target people that I know will buy instead of throwing up a billboard. Everyone sees it, and the majority of people seeing it aren't even in a place to buy, kind of thing.
Right. Well, that's always the thing. It's interesting that most of the people who use ad blockers are typically in the advertising world.
Ah!
You know, they want to use the technology, but I don't want you to use it on me. But what's funny is that when you put those barriers up and you say, don't track me, when you think about a large data set like every individual in a town, you actually make yourself more identifiable because
Ah,
you're such an outlier. You're so different than anyone else. And so it's much easier to figure out who you are from a tracker standpoint of view.
sure. Interesting. Tell me, your software specifically, it sounds like you're working with larger companies. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. And are you essentially a bridge between the ad platform, whatever it is, whatever's the hip and cool digital ad platform at the time, and the business that's going to be advertising, or I imagine at that point on that scale, there's probably marketing companies you work for or work with. Tell me how that all works.
Yeah, so the way that larger brands tend to work, you've got the places where you advertise, like Facebook, Hulu, Google, and inside at the brand, they typically have a team of in-house marketers. So you think about like a chief marketing officer, and then there's a team of people. There's like a Google expert, a Facebook expert, a TV expert. And then they typically have different agencies, marketing agencies who actually do the buys. Okay. So
Wow.
the TV person will hire a TV agency to do the buys. A Google person will have a Google agency, so on and so forth. So when you think about a large brand, they may have 10 people in-house that are marketers, and they may be working with 5 or 6 different agencies that are doing all of these purchases, everything from buying ads to doing public relations and all of those things. Where I come in and where Provalytics comes in is that all of those people all work in silos. The Google person lives in the Google world, so does the agency. And they do their best job that they can in order to figure out what's working and what's not working. But they're not talking to the TV people. And frankly, they don't care about the TV people. And the TV people, they're in their own silo. And not only that, but at the company itself, the Google person doesn't really like the TV person much because they're both battling for that same budget. So you've got these conflicts with the agencies who all have their kind of view of what's working and what's not working. And then you've got the internal folks, and then you've got the boss's boss, the chief marketing officer, who's trying to figure out what's really working. How do I get more growth, especially out of the same amount of money? Because all chief marketing officers, they all know there's a lot of wasted money. But the way they grow really is to be able to get more money to spend. And for that, they have to have a conversation with finance, the chief financial officer. And the problem is that the finance team looks over the marketing team's numbers and they're like, these don't make sense. These are not numbers I can get behind. So we come in first as a bridge for that internal marketing team to have a different view of things, a unified view that's holistic in nature, so that that TV person can still work on just TV, but their numbers that they look at, their final numbers in terms of how their TV is doing, also incorporates all of the Google, all of the Hulu, all of the public relations, everything all together. So we get them working together more as a cohesive unit because they're sharing the same numbers as opposed to trying to integrate different numbers. Then we work as a bridge with the agencies and get them to come on board as well too. So we give them a view into what's actually happening with the brand. Once that happens, everyone has like this kind of kumbaya moment. Then we can present the unified numbers in this unified team to the chief marketing officer. And now there's numbers that can actually be shared with finance so that it makes sense because now everything adds up. I mean, to give you an idea, let's say I had 1,000 sales today. Okay. Whatever. I sold 1,000 things. When I go and I pull my reports from Google, from Facebook, from all of these digital places, and I add up how many sales I had, it'll actually say probably 4,500 sales.
All right.
So the numbers never add up. And then you have TV that doesn't have clicks or anything, and they're going to take credit too. So someone on that team has to take a haircut, meaning it's like Google said that they actually got, 1,000 of the sales. And someone else says, no, ours said 1,000. So now there's this infighting about, well, who's gonna take less credit? And they don't want to do that. So someone has to come in and be like Switzerland and get everyone to kind of play nice with each other. But it is a battle, the numbers work, but the biggest part of our job with our team is helping people accept that there's a different perspective and that there's a different view. Human beings, we tend to be one-sided on things. We have an opinion and we can't imagine anything else until it starts to impact us. And what happens is that I like the way things are going. I like the way Google's performing. And then when we show them a different perspective that shows Google isn't performing as well as they want, now there becomes a battle. And that's where part of the kind of change management process comes in to help people see that in order for this brand to grow, we all have to work together towards the greater good. So we become a bridge for each member of that team, for the agencies, and eventually for the CMO, for them to have better, productive conversations with finance.
So you're almost a mediator as well as the whole software numbers person.
Yeah, I mean, that's, years ago, I always would say, if it wasn't for the people, this business would be easy to do. Yeah,
I feel the same way about my business. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's any business. But yeah, I mean, you would think that, if marketers are truly what they call data driven and they follow the numbers, you put a new set of numbers in front of them and you prove to them that these are the better numbers, that they're going to follow them. But people don't like change.
No, oh my gosh.
They'll
Oh my gosh.
fight it in every possible way. They really will.
Tell me, I want to ask you something, I guess, as it relates to my business with what one of the challenges that we're having
Yeah.
is, like you mentioned, this people fear change. And I'm trying to imagine if I was selling this product to a company, all the stars that I have to get to align at that company that I don't necessarily have control over. How do you get buy-in from people? Even though I imagine it's easy to get a few marketing people are like, yeah, this rocks out. This makes complete sense. Other people are like, it's different. No. How do you sell it to the people that aren't sure or aren't aware or just say no because it's, as far as they're concerned, different?
That's a great question. So the way to sell in something like this is we don't sell it in to the people who they're not going to look as good as they do now. And we kind of know who those people are based upon how Google tends to look at things. And we start selling in by we start from the top down. We start at the CEO or the chief marketing officer level because the number one frustration that chief marketing officers and VPs of marketing have is I can't, I'm hearing that there's these other channels that are working, things like connected television, podcast advertising, and things like digital out of home, these billboards. And I'm seeing my competitors spending more and more dollars on connected television, and I'm hearing that their sales are growing. And I tried it, and anecdotally, I saw sales go up, but I had nothing to prove that that was the cause of it. So I can't actually now get budget to invest in that. Finance won't give me additional dollars. So in order for me to invest in it, I have to cut something. And it would be silly of me to cut something that the numbers show are actually working. So there has to be another way to figure this out. So we come in where there's frustration and problems, and that is at a higher level. That's how we sell it in. We don't sell it in, like, for example, I cannot sell this in to someone in Google. So the person in charge of Google, because my sales pitch to them is going to be, hey, you should bring this in because when we bring this in, your channel is not going to look as good as does now. No one would accept
Yeah.
that.
Sign up
No,
right now. Yeah.
no one's going to accept that because most of our clients, when they come to us, they are spending way too much money in Google. And the reason for that is because how are they measuring? They're using Google's analytics to measure their entire business, which is completely exactly what Google wants you to do.
Yeah.
So it works out for Google, but it doesn't work out well for the brand. The brand is like, just like you, we spend more money like Google tells us to do, or like Facebook tells us to do, and sales aren't going up. And it's because when you think of a business and you think of it like a funnel, you're spending all of your dollars down at the bottom of the funnel, which is where people are bidding heaviest because we know people are in market. So everyone is trying to bid the most money for someone who's ready to buy today. And
Hmm.
they're forgetting that you could spend less dollars at people who aren't even in market yet, but will be. But that's tough to measure. We can measure it. So that's where people tend to come to us. So we talk to the folks. You can't sell something to someone who doesn't have a problem, who thinks everything is perfect, right? And the Google folks
That is
think
so
everything
true.
is perfect. So
That is so true.
yeah, so there's a lot of frustration at that C level in terms of because their numbers are getting cut. Finance wants to cut marketing. They don't see it as being efficient because they see that they've given more money and sales are not up. And the marketers want to invest dollars in more upper funnel branding type stuff, but they don't have a way to measure and prove that it actually worked. So that's where we solve a problem, is at that level.
Got it. I love that you said that you can't sell anything to anyone that doesn't have a problem. Because
Right.
that is something that I've taught my crew that we have to find, even when a client reaches out to us or potential client reaches out to us, that we have to find what the problem is that they're trying to solve. And then we have to, I call it twisting the knife, like find the knife sticking out of their back and just twist it to double check that they're willing to pay for it to get taken out.
Well, that's the thing is that, any problem that can be fixed, there's no quick fix to it. Not only do you have to spend the money, but there's also, you're going to have to devote resources and time, and it's not going to be overnight as well. Some people want a quick fix or they have unrealistic expectations.
So true.
And it's just important to know who is the right, what do they call it? Your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Who's your ideal
Hmm.
customer?
Yeah. So true. Jeff, where can people find you?
They can get great information at provalytics.com if they want to learn more, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I always love talking to other entrepreneurs. Uh, it's been an exciting journey for me, and I love speaking to folks and hearing about theirs.
Yeah. Is there just for the audience, because this we're generally geared toward smaller businesses, smaller quote unquote, right? Is there a minimum barrier to entry or a certain dollar spend in advertising where it makes sense for a company to reach out to you?
There is, if you're spending above 10 million or more per year, it makes sense. But what I'll leave people with is there's a DIY approach for this, which is pretty straightforward. And that is the way that most smaller businesses manage their marketing spend is they have a Google sheet. And every day or every week, they'll take all the data from the previous 7 days and they'll put on there how much they spent, where they spent, how many clicks they got, and how many leads or sales they got. And then they calculate like their cost per click and cost per sale. And they're forgetting a fundamental component of marketing and they're buying into the myth of marketing. And the big marketing myth is that you invest dollars to buy clicks and clicks lead to sales. That's not how marketing works. That's a myth that Google wants you to believe. The way marketing works is you invest dollars to buy eyeballs, which are impressions. And you're buying those eyeballs to get attention to build awareness. And when awareness is built up enough, people will walk into your store. And for most of us, our store is online. That's translated into clicks, and then that leads to sales. And there's a delay from that attention building to that click. So the DIY method is to take that Google sheet for the last 12 months for every day and add a new column right at the top, right after date, called impressions. And chances are when you downloaded these reports, you ignored the impression column. Everyone does because they're like, what am I going to do with this? That's garbage.
Yeah, 50 billion impressions or something. It just
Yeah,
seems like a number that you can't really do anything with.
So go back for every day for the last year and add impressions. And now what I want you to do, now you got this big Google sheet, create a graph for daily impressions for the last year, create a graph for daily clicks and then daily sales or daily leads, and start to look for, okay, I saw clicks go up on this day. Now go back to impressions and you're going to notice that impressions were pretty much the same. And you may have to go back a couple of days or maybe a week or two before. And you're going to notice that maybe there was a little blip or something, a little increase. And then you want to dig into that day. Maybe there was a certain ad that came out and you want to dig into it and you want to find out. So there's that delay. You have to figure out what that time delay is on average. And then you also need to figure out what you did on that day or series of days and do it again. But you need to change your perspective from looking at clicks to driving sales to more of an attention based and awareness based, which means impressions. So you need to change your mindset away from clicks towards impressions. If you do that, you're going to win in this game.
So paying attention more to the top of the funnel rather than the bottom.
Exactly. Because when you're at the top of the funnel, you're not where everybody else is bidding. And that is what builds awareness. And that's how you build a sustainable funnel. You always want to, you need to be down at the bottom. So when people are in market, you're going after them, you're reminding them. But now if you build awareness, as soon as they see your ad, they're going to remember you and know who you are because you're already in the consideration set. So focus on impressions, not on clicks. Always look at the clicks, but you should focus your decisions and your measurement based on those impressions.
I love it. You know, it's interesting that you say that now, because I believe the last time that I did Google Ads, I remember a question that it had right away, and it said, "What is your goal?" And it's like clicks or branding. And from my point of view, I was like, "This is a dumb question. I want people to buy. I don't care if they know what brand I am, as long as the money goes from their pocket to my pocket, and I get them the product or service they want. We're all good,
Right.
all good." But it sounds like that's not necessarily as cut and dry as I was hoping it would be.
You really need to have both types of campaigns going at the same time. But either way, you need to look at those impressions on a daily basis. That's what's important because when you graph it, that's when you'll start to see, oh wow, there's some real differences here day to day.
Got it. I love it. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time here. This has been awesome. I love talking marketing here.
It's same here, James. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this has been Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumph and successes of business owners across the land. We are locally underwritten by the Bank of Sun Prairie. If you're listening to this on the web, if you could do us a huge favor, give it the big old thumbs up, subscribe, and of course, share it with your entrepreneurial friends. I should mention as well, this show is brought to you by Calls on Call, extraordinary answering service, offering call answering services to service businesses across the country, as well as the Bold Business Book, a book for the entrepreneur in all of us, available wherever fine books are sold. We'd like to thank you, wonderful listeners, as well as our guest, Jeff Greenfield of Provalytics. Jeff, what is that website one more time?
Provalytics.com, Provalytics.com.
It doesn't get easier than that. I love it. Past episodes can be found morning, noon, and night at the podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. I want you to stay awesome. And if you do nothing else, enjoy your business.